Hello, this is Steve from ObjectRiver. Today we're going to show you first part of a two-part series demonstrating ObjectRiver's Angular implementation. Today is clearly just a demo showing Angular6 client connecting to a Java backend server hosted in Docker container. The whole demo will be done in Intellij. And so right now we're going to create a new project, and we're going to open one of our sample projects that are part of the ObjectRiver REST web toolkit. So we're going to open the bean example. This example shows various Java bean classes, enumerations, etc. with 2 or 3 webs. I open the project is basically an empty project with 6 or 7 empty directories, but it does contain a model, and our models end in extension REST, and this is an example of our model. What we have here is we have some enumeration type and a couple beans that contain some lists of a list of enumeration, list of other beans, so it's kind of like a nested example. If I scroll down here, what you'll see are the web services, and the syntax of the web services description closely follows the JAX-RS Java model, which are annotations, and so they're very simply described with these JAX-RS annotations. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly just generate the Java server for these definitions. If you've installed the ObjectRiver toolkit for Intellij, you'll have a cloud compiler. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm configuring what's called a run configuration, and I'm going to generate Java code. I'm going to generate the client and server. I'm going to select the model, add an email address, not going to build before I run. I'm going to change the source directory because I want this to go to Java, because the Angular will go to the source directory. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to run this run configuration. This is now running, contacting Amazon Web Services to run the compiler in the cloud. This will generate a bunch of Java code, as you can see. Now I'm going to do a little housekeeping on the generated code. I'm going to go to the module directory. I'm going to change where we put the sources, and tests were generated. We also generated some library dependencies. I'm going to add those to the model. Another thing we generated was a bean build implementation. So in Java, bean is one of the ways you can build your Java project. I'm going to execute this war target, and this is going to build this war file, which is a library of all the code we generated. This is how you're going to deploy your application to a web server. So as you can see, it generated a bean war. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a Docker container for this war file. And this Docker container is a Tomcat container. So essentially, it's a Tomcat container that contains our war file. And so that generated, let's see. Yeah, see, so that generated. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that container in Docker. Execute that. That ran. If I go to the terminal and I say Docker PS, this is going to list the containers that are running in my Docker instance. So you can see this container was executed 13 seconds ago, and it's called the bean server. So now we've completed the Docker side. We have the server running. So now let's set up our Angular environment. So the first thing we want to do is we want to execute a command called ng new bean, and we want to put it in directory /. So this is going to build all of the Angular infrastructure needed to start a project. Okay, that finished. That ran for like 2 minutes. Pause the video. Loaded like 1,000 node packages, but essentially they forgot one, so we're going to load another one, and we're going to run the node package manager, and we're going to install JSON to TypeScript. And this package we're loading we'll describe later in the part 2 of this series. Okay, that completed. Now let's generate our Angular code for this model we've created. So we're going to go back to the run configurations. I'm going to just clone this Java configuration. I'm going to just rename it to Angular. I'm going to go over to this menu and I'm going to select the target that we're trying to generate. So now we're trying to generate this Angular6 code. And I'm going to change the source directory to source instead of Java. So that's it. I'm going to say OK. And now I'm going to run this run configuration to generate Angular code. Again, this is going out to Amazon Web Services to run the compiler, and it's generating a bunch of Angular code. Okay, the one thing we want to do is if we go into the Angular code and we go into the app directory, you can see there's this app module TS, and there's one called app module TS update me. We don't crush this file. This top level app module file is how everything gets tied together in Angular. And so essentially you want to copy this file on top of that one anytime you add a new web service. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use Intellij refactoring, and I'm going to rename this file on top of the other one. Refactor, and it says it already exists. I'm going to overwrite it. Okay, now we're ready to do something. So I'm going to go to my terminal, and I'm going to say ngserve. And what this is going to do is going to bring up a web server in the background that we can see our Angular implementation. It's going to compile everything that's in the directory right now. So it's compiling. And it's successful compiling our code. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring over a Chrome browser, and I'm going to browse to the 4200 directory. Open this up bigger. Turn on a debugger just for the heck of it. So now what we're showing is we're showing our web services. And so this is basically like documentation for your services, and they're displayed in like a JAX-RS format. So it's very easy to read, and you can see the 3 web services we've generated. It also has, if I want to see what the test bean is, this will go down to the bottom part of the model, and it will show the definitions of the bean and the enumeration, etc. Okay, so this is just documenting all your web services in kind of like a JAX-RS type annotation format. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this web service, and for the most part, the client and server does mocking. Everything is ready to go. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run this. It's called beanless round trip, and the way the back end generates code, if you pass in the same thing that you return, it just returns the same thing you passed in, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to say invoke. Okay, now this brought up the request screen for the model. And so here we have an enumeration. We're passing this test bean list, test bean list arg, and that contains two lists. The first one is a list of enumerations, and so I can change these enumerations, and the second is a list of test beans, which then contains another list of strings. And this is all in the definitions. It contains an integer also. So now I've filled out the implementation of this web service, and now I'm just going to send it. And I'm going to send it to the back-end Docker server. And so now what it did is it just returned, as a result, everything that we put in into the input. So you can see that's what we input and that's what it returned. So I can go back. Another thing is everything in the request is cached. So you didn't lose any of your data. It's all cached in what's called a service, an Angular service, and we'll discuss that more in part 2. And I can go all the way back to the beginning and you can see this. So if I go back to Intellij, one thing I want to show you is I'll close this, I'll terminate this job, and if I go Docker PS, I see our backend server, and I can say Docker logs beans, and you can see we made a round trip into that bean by displaying the logs. So essentially that's it. If you want the more details is in the part 2, and so this demo is going to finish. Thank you for listening.